Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in Atlanta.
Bobby Campbell of San Francisco and Billy Walker of New York both suffer from a mysterious newly discovered disease which affects mostly homosexual men, but has also been found in heterosexual men and women. The condition severely weakens the body's ability to fight disease. Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia. Researchers know of 413 people who have contracted the condition in the past year. 1/3 have died and none have been cured.
Death didn't scare me. It was living with this for a long time. That's more frightening than death.
Investigators have examined the habits of homosexuals for clues.
I was in the fast lane at one time in terms of the way that I lived my life, and now I'm not.
The best guess is that some infectious agent is causing it. Today, researchers here at the National Centers for Disease Control said they had found several cases where people who had been sex partners both had the condition. The scientists say this probably means they are dealing with some new, deadly, sexually transmitted disease. The investigators see this as a serious public health problem.
From an epidemic point of view, there have been more deaths from Kaposi sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia than have occurred with all the cases of toxic shock syndrome and the Philadelphia outbreak of Legionnaire's disease combined.
Researchers are now studying blood and other samples from the victims, trying to learn what is causing the disease. So far, they have had no luck. Robert Bazell, NBC News, Atlanta.
I don't really think the term plague is the right way of calling it. We are faced with an epidemic, which initially started in gay community, but now we see it spreading to heterosexual, both men and women. So it's not really a gay-related disease. It is an infectious agent, most likely, which is spreading through the community.
Those are the only ones I have left.
Focus it.
This one was totally biopsied, and that was just a section biopsy, and that's that one didn't the interferon didn't get rid of the color of that one.
It looks really nice and clean now. Great. Big mat.
A victim of AIDS, a former drug addict who works on Wall Street and did not want to be identified.
When people on my block found out that I had this and they started watching the news and reading the news, they became scared and they wouldn't let their children, go near my children. I had to move off my block and I had to put my children in a different school.
Are you afraid of giving it to your wife or your kids?
Yeah, I try to stay away from my wife and my children. Like I'll let them kiss me on the cheek, but I won't kiss them on the lips. Even my wife, we haven't had any sex in months. I'm afraid to go near her, and she's afraid herself. If anything happens to her, then who's going to take care of the kids? So it's scary.
A victim of AIDS, a homosexual who was told to take a leave from his job.
I heard through the grapevine that, there were people that were, nervous about my being around.
When you got AIDS, did it make you think again about being gay? Did it make you rethink that lifestyle? Did it make you regret anything you've done?
No, I have absolutely no regrets. I do not feel guilty about anything that I've done. If anything, I become angry that so little has been done, in the sense that, I don't think the government and the medical profession's full efforts have been put towards the solution of this problem.
In San Francisco, police and firemen were issued masks to wear in case they have to resuscitate AIDS victims. In New York's prisons, there have been several AIDS cases. The guards are scared.
If somebody takes a club and comes at you with a club, you feel that you could defend yourself against that. But if there's an agent, whether it's a virus or some other agent, that is more frightening.
These doctors at Albert Einstein Medical College who treat AIDS patients and study the disease understand the reasons for the fear.
We have a disease here which is new, which was not here a decade ago. and we have no cure. And worse than that is that the mortality rate is really astronomical.
But at weekly meetings on AIDS, the doctors tell other hospital workers there is no danger if the proper precautions are followed.
There's a lot of panic being spread. Nobody has come down with AIDS from breathing the air. That's number one. Nobody has come down with AIDS who's been a hospital worker.
Most medical researchers believe that the fear of AIDS has gotten out of hand. Scientists do not know what causes the disease, but they strongly suspect it is a virus. All the evidence indicates it can be transmitted only by sexual contact or mixing of blood. The researchers at Albert Einstein are examining the family members of AIDS victims.
We have been studying contacts, household contacts of these children and adults, and we have no proof at all that there was a spread of the disease in the family, let's say from child to child.
Whatever causes AIDS destroys these blood cells called lymphocytes, which fight infection. The victims are then susceptible to various diseases. Drug addicts get AIDS from blood-contaminated needles. Children from their mother's blood in the womb. Others have gotten it from blood transfusions and blood products. But more than 70% of the victims are homosexual men who get it from sexual contact.
There are 5 people that I know personally and closely that have died since last summer.
Hundreds of thousands of gay men and lesbian women today march for homosexual rights. Some 200,000 people marched in San Francisco. Across the nation, the parades were dedicated to victims of the deadly disease AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. 70% of its victims are gay men.
While the theme of this parade has always been gay liberation and gay pride, the emphasis this year was an appeal for funding to help stop the spread of the AIDS disease. The cause of the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is unknown, and there is no known cure. The deadly disease has been mostly striking homosexual men. More than 700 cases have been reported in New York, 1,600 in the country.
I'm angry because there hasn't been enough research for AIDS, enough funding, and gay people are suffering, and it's outrageous.
Fear of the AIDS epidemic is causing a decrease in blood supplies in a number of cities. A Red Cross spokesman says a misconception that AIDS can be contracted by giving blood may force the cancellation of elective surgery in Pennsylvania and New York unless blood supplies increase.
AIDS is not God's vengeance upon the homosexual community.
At New York St. John the Divine, the Reverend Paul Moore pleaded for reason. So while gay marchers were appealing for liberation, they were also appealing for compassion.
Washington said this is the #1 disease, but they're not giving any money for it. It's absurd.
Homosexuals say AIDS victims are being discriminated against, evicted by landlords, and feared by health workers.
I have 4 friends that have died. I have 2 friends that are dying. I listen to them. Brilliant people. Brilliant people.
The Red Cross says the misconception that AIDS can be contracted by giving blood has caused a reduction in blood supplies in a number of cities. Hospitals treating AIDS victims have set up guidelines for healthcare workers. So far, no healthcare workers have come down with the disease.
Accusing the entire system, sir, of failing to respond with the same speed and the same commitment that might have been its motivation if those persons who are vulnerable to AIDS were in fact a member of another sociological group, sir.
This is not a political issue. This is a health issue. This is not a gay issue. This is a human issue. And I came here today in the hope that my epitaph would not read that I died of red tape.
This is what the HTLV-3 virus looks like, magnified thousands of times, clumped on the edge of a white blood cell it's invaded. Still closer, an individual virus, showing its dense center that distinguishes it from other viruses. The breakthrough came when researchers at the National Cancer Institute were able to isolate that virus and mass-produce it for closer study. Health Secretary Margaret Heckler made the announcement to a jammed news conference.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
And she introduced the scientist who led the team, Dr. Robert Gallo. When Gallo's group examined the blood of people who showed early symptoms of AIDS, 79% had antibodies indicating they were carrying the HTLV-3 virus. Among AIDS patients, 88% indicated presence of the virus. But among seemingly normal, healthy people, less than 1% seemed to be carrying the virus. But what about French scientists at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, who say they found the real virus, a different one called LAV? Gallo believes the U.S. work is conclusive and added that French and American scientists may simply have given the same virus different names.
We think the two laboratories are very likely to come together, although I cannot say at this point whether the viruses are identical.
Gallo says a blood test for HTLV3 will be ready in 6 months. It could screen out virus carriers from blood donation programs, and it could at least tell a potential AIDS victim if he or she is carrying the virus. In places such as San Francisco's gay community, there was some relief at today's news. Jim Fox, who's been exposed and is frightened.
It's going to liven the hearts up of a lot of people, and with a lot of hope that we're going to have a cure.
But researchers say development of a vaccine is at least 2 years away. Some say it could be much longer. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
The baths were ordered closed when city inspectors found evidence of sexual practices which they felt led to the spread of AIDS. Owners of 5 of the bathhouses plan to fight the order in court.
The campaign against the ordinance has been vicious. Gays are being called a dangerous and violent group that corrupts children and infects the community with AIDS.
The gay people are giving their blood knowing that it is contaminating people, and to me that is irresponsible and immoral.
Well, I went in to get my paycheck, and they said, geez, we have bad news, you're fired.
Some have lost their job because of AIDS, others who didn't.
I asked if there was a mistake. I didn't have AIDS. I knew a friend who did. There was no mistake. There was a fear of AIDS.
Ambulance drivers have refused to take AIDS patients on occasion.
He asked one of the attendants, he told him that I had AIDS, and the person said outright, I'm not touching him. Just like that.
And hospital workers have refused to take care of AIDS patients.
There's one crisis counselor at the Gay Men's Health Crisis who went 3 times a day to the hospital to feed his patient and wash him, bathe him, because the hospital had him in such isolation that nobody would go into his room.
Even the federal government has been accused of discrimination by lack of funding for research.
Hudson died in his sleep at 9 this morning at his $3 million home in Beverly Hills. His publicist, Dale Olson.
I certainly did not expect him to terminate so suddenly.
The actor had returned to his home in late August after having been told by doctors his health was too poor for any experimental therapy for AIDS.
Actually, he's had a slow downhill progressive course in the last several weeks. The last week it's been more rapid, and it was very apparent the last day or two that the end was close.
Longtime Hudson friend, Hollywood producer Ross Hunter.
Just that he was the best friend I ever had in the world, and we sort of grew up in this business together.
This was his last public appearance on July 15th of this year. Some publicity shots with Doris Day. At this point, he had known for a year he had AIDS. A week later, he flew to Paris for treatment, and the world knew it. Nothing could be done. He came home to die. A frightened Hollywood began raising money to fight AIDS. Hudson was too sick to attend last month's fundraising gala, but his statement was read by actor Burt Lancaster.
I'm not happy that I have AIDS. But if that is helping others, I can at least know that my own misfortune has had some positive worth.
Today, gays and others praised Hudson for having gone public with his disease.
I think the man did more for us in the gay community in the last few months than maybe we've done for ourselves in a long, long time.
San Francisco has more cases of AIDS per capita than any other city. The number of new victims, almost all of them homosexual men, had been doubling every year. But since January, the rate has held steady at about 62 new cases a month. That's unprecedented.
But we've been waiting 4 years now for some evidence that the epidemic might be coming under control, and this is the first real glimmer of hope we've had.
If the epidemic has peaked, experts give credit to a prevention campaign over the past 2 years. The message, avoid risky sex and you'll avoid AIDS. In gay areas, people are recruited to attend seminars.
It hit me one week, actually, friend number 18 died.
All this has led to a drastic change in sexual practices and lifestyle. According to one study, 8 out of 10 gay men here have stopped all unsafe sex. By unsafe, health experts mean any sex act where bodily fluids are exchanged. Promiscuity greatly increases the risk. The study of 500 gay and bisexual men indicates casual sex with strangers decreased by almost half in the past year alone.
Sometimes people come in and meet a stranger and 10 minutes later you see them leaving. That you're not seeing anymore.
Gay bathhouses, blamed for encouraging high-risk sex, were shut down by the city a year ago, but most had already closed for lack of customers. Business at gay bars has dropped by a third. So many homosexual men were infected with the AIDS virus before the change in lifestyle that unsafe sex is more dangerous than ever.
One contact now is as dangerous as 10 contacts were 4 years ago.
Other cities are applying the lessons learned in San Francisco. New York and Los Angeles are trying to discourage high-risk sex. A growing number of gay bathhouses have converted to health clubs. This one in Miami serves health food and caters to a growing number of gays who've become health fanatics out of fear they may have the AIDS virus. They hope to avoid the disease itself by bolstering the immune system.
Homosexuality is a sin.
It was California Republican William Dannemeyer who recently declared on the House floor God's plan for man was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Dannemeyer leads a group of conservative Republicans who hope to make AIDS a political issue. They meet to plan strategy for bringing controversial AIDS-related legislation to the House floor.
At some point, the public is going to demand action, frankly, to get on with protecting the public health.
Many Republican politicians believe voters eventually will reward them if they act early and aggressively against AIDS.
We want to identify every person who's a carrier. We want to identify every possible way to stop them from spreading the disease. And we want to be open and honest about this disease before it becomes a really serious national health threat.
Bathhouses frequented by homosexual men. The House already has voted overwhelmingly to close them if federal authorities believe they help spread AIDS. But more controversial are proposals to find and segregate those exposed to AIDS, to prohibit those with AIDS from working in health care, to make it a felony for those in an AIDS high-risk group to knowingly donate blood, and to prohibit children with AIDS from attending school. In New York City, a Republican campaign proposal to close all businesses that cater mainly to homosexual men. Also, mandatory blood tests for doctors, nurses, teachers, food handlers, and prostitutes. The Republican mayoral candidate who's trying to make AIDS a campaign issue.
It is our duty to protect these people from themselves if we are forced to. The AIDS virus has no civil rights.
Congressman Dannemeyer charges that Democrats won't be tough enough on AIDS because, he says, the party fears alienating homosexual voters.
They have opened up their party to the male homosexual community in America. And those members of Congress or state legislature or county government who don't take those actions that are needed are going to pay the political price for not having done so.
A California Democrat rejects the charge that his party will be soft on AIDS. He has a different concern.
I fear there are a lot of people who have been strongly against the gay community and would like to use this terrible tragedy of AIDS as a basis for coming in and showing how strongly they are against the gay community.
I think it is one more instance of fag bashing.
Last weekend, Daryl Yates' Rist predicted that the MINESHAFT would close. He had started going to the gay backroom bar 10 years ago. But Saturday night, Rist went as a journalist, the last stop on a tour he had taken of city gay bathhouses to see if patrons were avoiding fellatio and sodomy as required by state law. At the MINESHAFT, Rist says he saw several encounters he suspected were violations. But he points out they involved maybe a half dozen of 400 men who had packed the bar that night.
The men who come here who aren't well read about the disease are going to meet men here who are. It's a peer education. They're going to be educated by their peers. This place is not selling death any more than the heterosexual clubs are selling death. None of these clubs wants their clientele to die, and no gay man in this city wants to die, nor does he want his friends and lovers to die.
But the MINESHAFT's neighbors, the meat packers, don't believe Rist. They say they believe what they see.
They're making love in the street on top of cars and everything. This is men, grown men. I mean, that's not normal.
We've seen it all since we've been here. They try to pick us up. They come out drunk.
Sometimes in the morning you see needles on the floor here, and we have to work around it. This is government meat inspected places here.
The meat handlers say it's gone on too long. Mayor Koch agrees in light of the AIDS crisis.
This is a matter that involves a lot of money to these people. They are selling death. Places where death can be distributed. We don't want that to go on. But nevertheless, they don't give a damn about it, apparently, because it's going on, and they're making money.
Mayor Koch is an utter hypocrite, if that's what he said. This place has had its role in educating people.
Between a man and a woman, they can license prostitution or something like that. But what they're doing is abnormal in the sense that most of these people, they're not fit, they're not human beings, they have emotional problems.
Young addicts injecting heroin into their veins in an empty lot on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. First, they dissolve the drug. As they inject it, they pull large amounts of blood into the syringe to make certain they get all the heroin into their bodies. It is because so much blood is involved that the widespread practice of sharing needles has spread AIDS rapidly among drug users. One infected addict leaves his blood containing the virus in the needle, and the next one to use the needle gets the AIDS virus into his bloodstream.
I had heard about AIDS. I knew very little about it, and I knew the drug users could get it. But, I used that old refrain, I'll never get it.
Cheryl Acasella is one of the more than 2,800 people in this country who have gotten AIDS from sharing needles. But that number is just a beginning. Public health officials estimate that hundreds of thousands of people have been infected with the AIDS virus from drug use. No one knows how many will get sick, but they all could infect others.
Who wants to give you that advice?
These people are raising money and signing petitions in a fight to keep Ryan White out of their school. They are parents of Ryan's schoolmates in Kokomo. They fear he could give their sons and daughters AIDS.
He has a spill on a table, a chair, something. Your daughter comes in, they say they wipe it up. Your daughter comes in, touches it. Hey, what's to say she is not going to get it?
They have filed suit to keep Ryan out of school as a health risk.
My daughter's in 2 of his classes, and I will not permit her to be in those classes again. I won't do it.
Ryan, who got AIDS from contaminated blood while receiving a transfusion, has been certified by a doctor to attend school. He will be in class on Friday because the lawyer for the parents who filed suit told them the case has been continued until Friday afternoon. Now they are threatening a boycott.
For one day on Friday, I think we ought to keep them kids home until we find out what that judge wants to do.
And if the lawsuit fails, many of these parents plan to pull their kids out of school, transfer them to private schools, or teach them in their homes to avoid any contact with this young victim of AIDS. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Kokomo, Indiana.
It is about health, about attitudes, about looking at life in these United States. And we begin with the story of Ryan White. He died today. He was 18 years old. For the last 5 years, he lived with AIDS. He got it from a blood transfusion. He died in Indianapolis from an illness related to that disease. During his long struggle, Ryan White attracted nationwide attention and sympathy. Here's James Polk.
The doctor who announced Ryan White's death was touched by his life.
He had no bitterness. With an honest simplicity, his was the voice that many, if not most, first heard.
5 years ago, just before Christmas, Ryan White was told he had AIDS and became a pariah among his playmates.
I became known as the AIDS boy.
Ryan at a Washington hearing 2 years ago.
It was my decision to live a normal life, go to school, be with friends, and enjoy day-to-day activities. It was not going to be easy. Even at church, people would not shake my hand.
Ryan was barred from his small-town Indiana school. His family went to court, fought and won, but finally moved away. His legacy?
I think Ryan has probably shown the world how to be truly courageous.
The gay rights community faces its biggest challenge as the Supreme Court hears argument today on laws in Georgia and about half the states that prohibit anal and oral sex.
There's only one sexual act which is legal in the state of Georgia, and everything else can get you 20 years.
Under pressure from the gay community, many states did away with such laws. But there's a new debate about keeping them because of AIDS.
We know to a certainty that AIDS is transmitted in great measure by homosexual conduct. The thought of removing that statute from the books, which prohibits homosexual conduct, does not seem all that timely to me.
You criminalize the conduct, people won't report, people will lie. There will be no capacity to deal with the spread of the disease.
Gay leaders in Atlanta challenged the law after a man was arrested in his bedroom. But gay rights activists claim the sodomy laws could also affect 80% of married couples and say the case is really about sexual privacy. The Justice Department says federal law does not prohibit the firing of potentially millions of workers who may be carrying the AIDS virus. The opinion was reached by Assistant Attorney General Charles Cooper, who said carriers who might spread the disease are not handicapped workers whom the law protects.
There is a distinction between a handicap and the ability to communicate a disease.
That could affect an estimated nearly 2 million people who test positive for AIDS, though most will never come down with it, and who until now, the government said, posed no risk. 6 months ago, the Public Health Service concluded that AIDS is not spread by casual contact. But the Justice Department ruling said conclusions of this character are too sweeping. Gay rights groups were angry.
It's a subterfuge for discrimination. That's all. It's based on irrational fears.
It certainly reinforces the false notion that AIDS can be spread casually and will give some employers the rationalization that they're looking for to discriminate, despite everything that scientists have said.
Employers could be encouraged by this ruling to discriminate against people based simply on the results of a blood test.
But an expert who advises businessmen said conflicting signals from Washington had just confused the issue.
I don't think much of anything's going to happen. I think most employers will allow the AIDS-affected employee to remain in the workplace as long as he can perform the job.
Supporters of the AIDS initiative were able to gather 680,000 signatures, 280,000 more than they needed to place it before California voters in November. The measure would bar persons with AIDS and those infected with AIDS virus from public and private schools, from commercial food handling facilities, and would subject them to isolation and quarantine. The initiative is backed by supporters of radical right-wing activist Lyndon LaRouche. NBC News was not permitted to attend a news conference held this morning.
Okay, no NBC, sorry.
Organizers claim NBC was barred because it had been unfair to LaRouche and his supporters in the past. But when questioned by other reporters as to how the quarantine would work, supporters were not clear.
Quarantine will be applied where necessary in order to prevent the spread of the disease.
The state's Attorney General's office is also unclear and is preparing a detailed legal analysis of how the initiative would work. In California, opposition to the initiative is building. Today, the Los Angeles City Council condemned both it and Lyndon LaRouche.
It literally preys on people's bigotry, in people's hatred, in people's fears.
Several organizations have vowed to fight passage of the initiative. Some AIDS victims say they too will fight.
We're fighting to survive. We're fighting the disease. And now we're going to have to take our time and our energy to fight this initiative.
The proposed law could even include those suspected of having AIDS.
The initiative speaks only to people who are carriers of the virus. We have no test to determine that at this point.
Political analyst Joe Sherrill says the initiative will fail once voters make the connection between it and Lyndon LaRouche.
If the issue boils down to simply gay rights, they will do very well. But if the issue can be isolated in terms of, let's take a look at who supports it and who opposes it, then they will not do well.
Supporters of the initiative claim its chances are good and intend to spend several $1 million on a campaign between now and November.
Joe Stanley is one of the hospital's first patients. He says at last he's being treated like a victim instead of a social outcast.
It's very reassuring to know that finally we have stopped classifying AIDS as a gay disease. We're now having to look at it as being a disease for people and persons.
I declare this Institute for Immunological Disorders open.
There's no place like it in the world, a hospital devoted exclusively to the treatment of and research on AIDS. The facility will be operated by the American Medical Corporation and MD Anderson Hospital. Officials say they will offer medical treatment and counseling.
Patients here will not be treated as the biblical lepers were treated. They will find an institution which understands the fear and the despair and the adjustment which each of them are enduring.
Not everyone in Houston wants an AIDS hospital. Last year, voters overwhelmingly defeated a proposal that would have given gays equal employment rights at City Hall. Many here feel the same way about the new hospital.
I'd rather it wouldn't be an AIDS hospital, but really I don't know of anything that I can do about it.
The tumor characteristically involves the skin.
Members of the hospital staff are learning about symptoms, treatment, and the many misconceptions about AIDS. Employees hope the new hospital will change public attitudes.
One of the hardest things besides the disease that the AIDS patient has to deal with is prejudice, and I think that maybe this is the place to eradicate that.
Fully half of San Francisco's 80,000 gay men already may carry the AIDS antibody. Since 1981, there have been 1,400 AIDS deaths here.
San Francisco AIDS Foundation can help you.
And there are a large number of public and private organizations in San Francisco specifically designed to assist people who already have AIDS and to prevent others from getting it. Jeffrey Froner distributes small bottles of bleach to drug addicts. He hopes they'll use the bleach to sterilize shared needles and keep AIDS from spreading.
If you share a needle with somebody who has the virus, who's infected already, then when you use it, you shoot up that same bits of blood, which will contain the virus, and then you can catch it yourself.
What about AIDS? What if you're infected with the AIDS virus? Are you going to know that? No. That's right, you may not know.
Officials worry that young people are the next AIDS risk group, so these discussions are unusually frank.
Okay, how can you prevent AIDS?
By using condoms.
By using condoms? How else?
By not shooting up.
By not shooting up and sharing needles?
By not having sex, period.
By not having sex, period.
It isn't only the kids in San Francisco who are learning about AIDS. The adult population has been educated as well.
We don't have the irrational fear of AIDS that you might find elsewhere. We've been through that the last 4 or 5 years. We know that you don't get the disease by casual contact with food or utensils. We're way past that now.
But even so, a lot of people in San Francisco are afraid of AIDS, and it is that fear that got Proposition 64 on the ballot in the first place.
I'd say that there is some fear. Straight people are scared of it. If the only way to stop it is quarantine people, I don't think there's any way around it. I think they're going to have to do it.
But many city and state leaders think that Proposition 64 goes too far, so they held a dinner recently to raise funds to campaign against it. The No on 64 camp says the proposition will undo all of the work that they've done to combat AIDS, that it will lead to mass screening and detention, that it will cost billions of dollars and accomplish nothing.
This initiative will increase the fear, increase the anxiety that people have, because it will assume, and the public will assume, that this is an easily contracted disease that is spread like the flu, like measles that keeps kids out of school, like chicken pox. It isn't.
Mayor Feinstein, does the success of Proposition 64 getting on the California ballot indicate to you that there is greater fear out there about AIDS than you may have anticipated?
Well, I think there is fear, and I think what 64 does is capitalize on it. It's not helpful and it's not constructive, and nothing positive happens if it passes. But I think what we ought to do in this is really listen to the health people. Listen to those people who are trained and skilled in communicable disease. Keep politics out of it and take that advice.
The FDA's approval of AZT today is one of the quickest approval actions on record and will make the drug available to the 14,000 AIDS victims who can be helped by it.
But I would expect that certainly within 2 weeks from today, patients will be able to begin taking Retrovir under this system.
AZT was developed in 1964 as an anti-cancer drug, but in experiments a year ago, it prolonged the lives of certain AIDS patients, those who had the weakest immune systems, and those who had pneumocystis pneumonia, a common, often fatal infection in AIDS patients. AZT did not help everyone who took it, and the drug is not a cure.
So it is a big step, but again, it's not a cure.
But that's part of the process of coming forth with a cure, and hopefully other drugs will come about or vaccinations that will just complement this.
AZT is known to cause severe side effects. It can destroy bone marrow that produces blood cells, making some patients dependent on blood transfusions. Today's approval of the drug could place an enormous new burden on the nation's blood supply. AZT is very expensive and will cost patients $8,000 to $10,000 a year.
We are outraged at the extreme cost of AZT for persons with AIDS. People should not have to spend down all their assets for the privilege of going on an experimental drug.
Tim Doyle, 27 years old, has been taking AZT since January, free of charge as part of the research. He left his job last week because of AIDS complications and doesn't know how he can pay for the drug now.
I know I can't afford it at all. I know it sounds strange, but there's a lot of things I've left I'd like to do.
Some in Congress want the government to step in.
We're going to be urging the Congress to pass legislation that will make $60 million available for the purchase of this drug in fiscal year 1988.
White House officials felt that the president had to speak out because the disease has become the nation's overwhelming health concern. Even his own doctor, John Hutton, urged Mr. Reagan to pay more attention to the problem.
Our battle against AIDS has been like an emergency room operation. We've thrown everything we have into it. We've declared AIDS public health enemy #1.
Mr. Reagan said prevention is better than a cure. He sided with his education secretary, William Bennett, and other conservatives who say that the government should not provide sex education to children.
The federal role must be to give educators accurate information about the disease. Now, how that information is used must be up to schools and parents, not government.
The Surgeon General disagrees strongly, believing that children should be taught about condoms and given explicit sex education.
We can no longer afford to sidestep frank, open discussions about sexual practices, heterosexual and homosexual.
I don't quarrel with that, but I think that abstinence has been lacking in much of the education.
That angers some critics.
Until the Reagan administration realizes that the government's responsibility is saving lives and not saving souls, we will continue to see the virus spread through our society.
White House officials confirm that the president has never talked with his Surgeon General about AIDS or read the report Dr. Koop sent him last October.
The fact that it has taken the president 5 years to begin to even address this problem publicly demonstrates that this administration hasn't given it the level of commitment that it deserves.
Gay rights groups in Colorado say they will avoid a new AIDS reporting law by setting up clandestine laboratories and using doctors who will not report their names and addresses to the state health department. The Colorado legislature has passed, and the governor is expected to sign shortly, the bill which allows for criminal prosecution of doctors who fail to turn in the names of people who have AIDS or test positive for the virus. In extreme cases, the health department can also quarantine people with AIDS who refuse to change their sexual habits. The bill was bitterly opposed by groups who think a list, any list, is an invasion of privacy and will drive away those people who should be tested for the AIDS virus.
Colorado has chosen to take a stand that nearly every other state and every other national health organization and major health representative has said is clearly a direction not to go.
Meanwhile, there's another controversy over the president's plan to appoint a commission on AIDS. Advisors say Mr. Reagan does not intend to appoint any gays. Top researchers say that's an outrage and that they will boycott the commission. Gay activists say the White House is more concerned with right-wing politics than public health.
To exclude the gay community from a presidential commission on AIDS is the moral equivalent of excluding the Jewish community from a commission on the Holocaust.
Last night at a dinner to raise money for AIDS, President Reagan was booed when he urged more testing, including mandatory testing of federal prisoners and aliens trying to enter the United States.
This is in addition to the testing already underway in our military and foreign service. Now let me turn to what the states can do.
Vice President Bush got the same reception today at the AIDS conference when he repeated the president's proposals.
And additionally, we are encouraging the states to offer routine testing for those who seek marriage licenses and for those who visit sexually transmitted disease or drug abuse clinics.
At the conclusion of the speech, Bush, concerned about the heckling, asked Assistant Secretary of Health Robert Windom, "Who was that, a gay group out there?"
fact that he thinks it's some gay group really reflects the administration's lack of understanding of the significance of recommending mandatory testing.
During the conference, several dozen demonstrators, many representing gay organizations, were arrested near the White House. The District of Columbia Police wore yellow rubber gloves. The police said this was a routine procedure, but many charged that it showed an irrational fear of AIDS.
In naming his special commission, the president vowed a cure for AIDS would be found.
Whether by breakthrough or steady progress, we will beat this disease.
His commission includes experts from many fields, including geneticist Dr. Frank Lilly, who is also a gay activist. Lilly acknowledges that probably was a major factor in his selection, but he denies it's the only reason he was chosen.
If I'm a token gay, I'm also a token biomedical researcher, and everybody else on the commission is a token something.
They don't have the medical and public health background that one requires to address this kind of issue.
New Hampshire Republican Senator Gordon Humphrey.
And I think it's unfortunate when the President of the United States elevates the credibility and the standing of the practice of homosexuality by appointing a practicing homosexual to a commission.
This huge quilt that today is being spread out on the Capitol Mall in Washington has 2,000 panels, every one crafted by the friends and relatives of an AIDS victim. This memorial, the size of 2 football fields, is the brainchild of San Franciscan Cleve Jones.
So we want to show the President and the Congress and the rest of the country the enormity of this epidemic. And with our quilt, we hope to show that enormity by providing people with a glimpse of the faces that are behind all of the statistics.
To date, the AIDS virus has claimed over 24,000 lives, the majority homosexual men.
That we are always threatened by physical violence, and that the potential for discrimination in housing and employment is always there. The unfortunate thing now is that this epidemic is being exploited by preachers and politicians of the far right who deliberately are inflaming ignorance and hysteria against gay people under the guise of concern about an epidemic. We must pull ourselves together. We must cease this discussion of division and separate groups. There are no separate groups. And I think that just the image of the quilt alone says it all. We are all affected, we are all involved, and we are all part of the solution.
On AIDS research, no more delays. On AIDS discrimination, no more delays. On equal justice for lesbians and gay men, no more delays.
America is not a blanket, all one color of uncut cloth, all red, or white, or blue. America is a quilt made up of many patches, many pieces, many colors, many sizes, many textures, but everybody fits. Everybody counts. Everybody must have equal protection under the law in the real America.
More than 600 demonstrators crossed police lines to protest and to be arrested on the steps of the Supreme Court. Some of the police wore gloves because of concern about AIDS. The demonstration ended 4 days of protest in the Capitol over alleged inadequate programs to combat AIDS or to provide full rights for homosexuals.
They shouted their demands from the sidewalk and in the street. In a planned civil disobedience show, over 100 protesters blocked rush hour traffic at Broadway and Wall. Troops of police officers moved in, charged them with disorderly conduct, resisting arrest.
I'd say in the 60s, the black movement didn't win any friends by burning down cities, but they sure gained their civil rights. And that's why we're out here.
But other Wall Streeters questioned their message even more than their manner.
I think the country is doing the best they can.
The record shows the government has been multiplying the amount spent on AIDS research for the past several years. In 1986, the National Institutes of Health spent $135 million. This year, the budget is close to $500 million. Governor Cuomo's AIDS advisor, Dr. David Rogers, says that both the federal government and New York State are spending more than they did in the first years of the epidemic. But he says even more money is needed for the facilities and staff.
This could be an absolute national catastrophe unless we begin to get a handle on this. That it can, it already is tearing society apart in terms of sort of putting group against group. It's killing a dreadful number of young people who are in their most productive periods of their lives that we desperately need in terms of our whole economic and political and social welfare.
Mary Civello, News 4, New York.
While gays were gaining in the courts and legislatures, a new disease was diminishing their numbers. AIDS, still incurable, still pervasive among homosexuals. This month, the total number of Americans killed by AIDS will top the number of Americans killed in Vietnam.
AIDS has reinforced prejudice in those people who choose to be prejudiced. On the other hand, AIDS has made clear that gay people suffer discrimination and that they deserve the helping hand of government. Because otherwise we'll never be able to beat this terrible epidemic.
Stoddard believes AIDS has led to increased anti-gay violence. Last night in Greenwich Village, several motorists tried to run through some gay protesters blocking the street near the site of the Stonewall Inn. It's been quite a weekend.
Of the 3,200 volunteers in the San Francisco-based test, those so mildly affected they had no symptoms of AIDS and given AZT showed resilience fighting the disease.
We know from this study quite clearly that there will be a delay in progression significantly greater than for individuals who do not take the drug.
The gay community, the most affected by AIDS, has been slow to embrace testing for the virus, fearing a witch hunt. For the first time, the number of AIDS cases passed the 100,000 mark. And there are estimates by the end of 1992, 263,000 Americans will be killed by this disease.
Well, we are a nonviolent organization. I don't think we're here to make friends. We're here to raise the issues. No matter what you do, X number of people are going to approve and X number of people aren't. So you might as well get your message across the best way you can.
You would allow you're not making friends?
I would allow that AIDS is a very complicated issue and that we are now at last beginning to make friends. And as I said, I think the groundswell of new chapters, of new members, is very similar to what happened during the Vietnam War, where people got so angry at the government that they were forced into this frustration. And I think that's very definitely what's happening now. It took 10 years for the first 100,000 cases. The next 100,000 cases are all going to happen in the next 15 months. There's a new HIV infection every single minute. There's a new AIDS death every half hour. There are 212 deaths, there are 212 new cases every day of full-blown AIDS. In New York alone, the cases in straight women has gone up 2% in the last month.
So you think the acceleration of the disease is going to attract new people to your cause?
4 out of every 1,000 college kids is now HIV positive. A lot of parents are getting very angry.
We come to thank God for the life of Phil Howard, for all that he meant to all of you. San Francisco's gay community, once the capital of gay liberation, has become a community of young men who spend much of their time dealing with death and dying. Lord, have mercy. Many people compare the experience of living through the AIDS epidemic to war. In this city alone, AIDS already has killed more than 5,000 people. That is 3 times the number of people from San Francisco who died fighting in all the wars in this century.
You feel very helpless. There's absolutely nothing you can do.
Bob Ross publishes a gay newspaper called the Bay Area Reporter. Every week he prints obituaries of at least a dozen people in the area who died of AIDS.
It's a Holocaust in the sense that, like, it's some group is attacking our entire community, and no one seems to give a damn.
And people say it's like old age. But the difference is that my parents are in their 70s, but they don't know 6 people who died last month, and half of their friends aren't in the hospital.
Psychologist Ken Charles, like many gay men, spends much of his time caring for his lover, Daryl Merrick, who has AIDS.
The inevitability is that the virus will get me.
I prepare myself for Daryl dying every day. I'll live through that and be there with him, and I still would never have it any other way.
Studies show that about half the gay men in San Francisco are infected with the AIDS virus, HIV. Those who escaped infection, like Ed Wolf, say they often feel guilty.
Why did I live? What does this mean? Why me comes up for anybody who survives something that seemingly hundreds and thousands of other people are not.
Men who are not infected are having a very difficult time.
Psychologist Walt Odette says that many of his uninfected gay patients feel lonely because in many ways what was the gay community has become the AIDS community. And he says that men occasionally practice unsafe sex to try to become infected.
As a friend said to me, I feel that I'm being left out of the great event of our time. Some men certainly have an unconscious or largely unconscious desire to participate in this event.
In other words, to become infected.
Yes. Yes, to become infected. And by becoming infected, to remain a part of the community that means as much to them as the gay community does.
Many gay community leaders are worried about studies that show that increasing numbers of gay men are returning to unsafe sex.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today. I just want to make clear, first of all, that I do not have the AIDS disease, because I know a lot of you want to know that, but the HIV virus. My wife is fine. She's negative, so no problem with her. I plan on going on, living for a long time, bugging you guys like I've always have. So you'll see me around. I plan on being with the Lakers in the league. Hopefully David will have me for a while. And going on with my life. And I guess now I get to enjoy some of the other sides of living, that because of the season and the long practices and so on. I just want to say that I'm going to miss playing, and I will now become a spokesman for the HIV virus, because I want people and young people to realize that they can practice safe sex. And, you know, sometimes you're a little naive about it and you think it could never happen to you. You only thought it could happen to, you know, other people and so on and on. And it has happened, but I'm going to deal with it, and my life will go on.
The prevalence rates of AIDS infection in Africa will be one of the subjects that will get a lot of attention at this conference. Studies will show that in some areas of some countries, almost 1/3 of the entire population is infected. At the same time, research reports will highlight many successes, especially in the area of the search for possible vaccines. This contrast of awful news with some hope will be a major theme of the conference. Dr. Anthony Fauci will be a keynote speaker tonight.
Well, I think you have to divide it into two components. One is the scientific approach and one is the public health approach. What's happened scientifically has been most extraordinary. Now, it's difficult to call that a triumph, even though in some respects it is, because it's done in the background of an epidemic that is still raging out of control.
There will be some reports on improved treatments, but no major developments. Indeed, for the foreseeable future, throughout the world, the number of people dying from AIDS will continue to increase dramatically.
The AIDS is on its way to being the leading cause of death in young people, young adults in the developed countries. And therefore, stabilization at that level means that we've got a tragedy for a long time to come.
There is no debate on the scope of the epidemic in many poor countries. In parts of Africa, millions of cases, so many that population growth is being reversed. Actress Elizabeth Taylor, who works for AIDS causes, spoke today about the global threat.
I am hopeful that science will continue to find the critical answers in time to save the millions and millions of people around the world.
AIDS is also attacking Asia. India alone has twice the population of sub-Saharan Africa, and AIDS is spreading at an explosive rate through much of India by heterosexual sex. 5 years ago, Thailand had almost no AIDS. First, prostitutes and drug users became infected. Now it is in most segments of the population.
Among men being drafted into the Army, 6% are seropositive.
Several reports at the AIDS conference concern promising results from vaccine studies. Many people are urging tests in third world countries as soon as possible.
You have to do the test in a country where the risk of becoming infected through natural conditions is very high. Otherwise, you have to wait forever.
Joe Frattini, Charles Schrader, Dick Scott, Robert Bobiolina Watson, Dan Bowers, Francis Brady, Jim Butcher, Tom Cadell, Joe a biker, Lowell, Louis Schneider, Joe A. Castillo, Bill Gassaway, Ray Greenwood, Bob Kissel, David